Hello, my fellow Americans. This year marks the 250th anniversary of an important time in our country's history. In 1777, delegates from the Second Continental Congress met in York County, Pennsylvania, to adopt the Articles of Confederation, among other important businesses. The building I'm standing in front of as I speak is the Old York Courthouse. Although this building has been reconstructed, it is the very place where the delegates met to discuss the future of our country. Behind me is the Old York Church. The York Liberty Bell originally hung in this courthouse, but now it is in the vestibule of this church. The bell announced the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and it also signaled when the session of Congress met in York. Outside of the church were the tombs of several soldiers who served during the Revolutionary War. This is the Golden Plough Tavern. It is a rare example of early German architecture. The building was originally by Martin Eichelberger during the earliest days of Yorktown settlement in 1971. It served as a tavern during colonial times and long after that. Beside the Golden Plough Tavern is the General States House. The house is called this because in 1778, General Horatio Gates lived in the house during the time the Second Continental Congress met in York. This is another colonial house, the Bonnet Bob Log House. It is built with square timbers. This house shows what colonial life was like during the 1770s. These are just a few of the many great buildings that could be found in the area during the 1770s. If you ever get a chance, please stop by and visit these historical sites located in York, Pennsylvania.
School in 1777. The children in the classroom were all ages from 6 to 12. Girls and boys sat on separate sides of the room. Some kids are lucky to have school in a schoolhouse, otherwise they would be homeschooled and probably have the same job as their father. In a schoolhouse, you eat outside in the summer and inside in the winter. There is a wooden stove in the middle of the classroom. If you don't bring wood for the stove, you must sit farthest away from the heat. They use books called horn books. It always has a Bible verse because they learn about the Bible. It has paper so they learn to read and write. One punishment is putting a cut branch on the end of their nose. That is school in 1777.
Home life in 1777 was different from today's home life. People back then didn't have a lot of furniture and supplies that we have today. They had to work all day. The poor people lived in tiny houses or sometimes caves. Some families have only straw mattresses and a fireplace. Rich people were lucky enough to have at least a decent-sized house. The men hunt, plant, and harvest food. The younger girls and women make candles and soap. Women made clothes and meals. Girls had to cook, sweep, feed the animals, and get vegetables. Boys would walk around the fields barefoot, planting and pulling weeds. They also cared for the animals. There was only one room that was used for sleeping, eating, cooking, and working.
Clothing of colonial York in the 1770s are very different than the clothing we have in York today. The men wore knee pants called breeches. They never wore long pants. They didn't have zippers in colonial times. They used buttons. Some clothing today have buttons, but that is just one thing that has stayed the same. Men wore wool stockings often up to their knees. The shirts were loose with cuffs on their wrists. They wore a wig in public. Women wore long dresses. Women wore a shoe called clogs over their shoes. Young boys wore an old dress until they were 5 or 6, and then they dressed like their fathers. That is what clothing was like in colonial York.
The jobs and careers of the colonial time were very different from now. The jobs were the blacksmith, the cooper, the miller, the cobbler, the silversmith, the potter, the tinsmith, the merchant, the town crier, the tanner, the tailor, the hatter, the cabinet maker, the clockmaker, the wheelwright, and the barber. And many more. Some of the jobs say what they do, like the hatter. The jobs and careers were very important in the colonial times.
Colonial York chores in the 1700s. Women and girls did most of the inside work, such as mopping, cooking, cleaning, laundry, and making soap and candles. Women also made all of the clothing. Men also had chores. They had most of the outdoor chores, such as hunting, getting firewood, caring for the animals, and made the furniture. They also harvested crops. Families were usually very large. Families often lived in log cabins. That's what chores were like in the 1700s.
A long time ago, in the 1700s, transportation was very different from today. In the 1700s, people used many different things for traveling than us. These things are horses, wagons, boats, and in the winter they used sleds, but they mostly walked. Instead of horses, they sometimes used mules to pull wagons and sleds. Instead of roads, they used old Indian trails. The women stayed home and while the men traveled. That's how life was in the colonial time.